Hey everyone, Card Cafe here with another deck profile update. This time for my favorite boy, Blonde Ezel. He's here. He has also now gotten his promo treatment, and I have finally acquired my set. So I am ready to go ahead and talk about this deck. I know it's technically kind of cheating to lump it in here with the set 13 crew, because there isn't any specific set 13 cards that I am running in this deck, but there's been a good amount of change here now, and I want to talk about it. And I only just got this promo here during set 15 meta, so we're gonna count it, and it's my channel, so I can do what I want, and that's what we're gonna do. So let's talk about kind of what we're doing now with this deck and where it stands. So firstly, in the no change section, obviously you're still running the ride line as it stands. It's the same one as before, so you know, as always, when you ride over the grade 0, you draw a card going second. When you ride over the grade 1 Gareth, you search your deck for a copy of the King of Beasts order, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then of course the main skill here is Biomanes. During the main phase, if you have these two specifically in your soul, discard a card and you get to just ride skip up into Ezel on that turn. So obviously a very strong skill going first, still a strong skill going second, means that you're going to be persona riding first regardless of the situation. So you're always going to be doing it. Very strong skill, very fun skill. It's still always funny to see people's expressions when you do it for the first time. So, you know, no change there. Strong skill will always be strong, and the deck's really the main thing it's got going for it. Yeah, for the rest of the grade 3s, yeah, no changes here. Max ratio of your persona ride Ezels, and also the Grail, which if you don't know what the Grail does, it's just basically an extra persona ride target. If you didn't persona ride that turn, you can play this and you get a persona ride. You draw a card, get the 10k to the front row. The numbers in this deck are very important. Having that 10k to the front row is very vital for your pressure turns, so you want to make sure that you have the max copies. And then the order count is still the same here. I'm still running 4 copies of the Beast Reign Supreme King of Beasts order. Really strong order. I love that this is just free, like we talked about before. Search your deck, search top 7, excuse me, for a card, call it to the board, gets 5k for no cost. That's really hard to argue with. The other reason I run 4 is you're almost certainly going to be discarding one of these at some point during the turn where you're doing the ride skip up, because you got to discard 2 in that turn. You got to discard to ride up to Biomane for the normal ride phase skill, and then you have to discard for Biomane skill to ride skill to Ezel. So one of these is probably getting discarded during that turn. So I'd like to make sure I have more copies so I can still use it in that same turn, because using this the turn you ride skip up into Ezel is important to fill your board. So 4 copies. But let's talk about the new boy. Card that is making this deck still kind of being able to play in the playground. 4 copies, 100% of the Knight of Insightful Eyes, as Reltis, something like that. I'm not good at pronouncing names. That's beside the point. He's got a couple of skills, so let's talk about them. Both are very strong. So the first skill is that when he attacks, if you have a Vanguard that is an Ezel, so it is Ezel locked, you can't use the skill until you are on Ezel, you can either give your whole front row 5,000 power, give your Vanguard the effect to give the whole front row 5,000 power. And if you do that, he bottom decks himself at the end of the battle, which is really good. So he's another unit that just puts himself on the bottom of the deck to free up the spot for Ezel's superior call during the battle phase, which has to be open rearguards. Or you can choose to bounce a card in your back row back to your hand. That's really good just for the versatility of it. Sometimes, especially if it's after you've called cards to the board, for Ezel's skill. Like if you called this off of Ezel's skill and it's like the last attack and you don't need the 5,000 power, it's good to bounce like Din Drain particularly, or other cards in your back row that you want to save or reuse back to your hand. Especially good against like Jejuled is the main one I can think of, where Jejuled is constantly popping your back row. Being able to bounce Din Drain back to your hand is incredibly useful. So that's kind of the situations where you wouldn't go for the 5k to the front row. 5k to the front row is the thing you'll be doing the most, especially if you already have this on the board before doing Ezel's superior call, and also just making good numbers. And also it stacks with each other. So obviously it's a continuous skill. He doesn't like attack twice or anything like that. So that isn't what happens. But if you have one of these on the board, attack, give the Vanguard the skill 5,000 to the front row, and you get another one either just by calling it that turn or calling it off Ezel and attack, that does stack. So if you have different one of these on the board, or multiple copies of this on the board, I should say, their instances of their skills are stacking. So if you've attacked with 2 of them, your front row is getting 10,000 power if you choose to go that route, so on and so forth. So very strong card. The 5k really matters and makes some really good numbers in this deck. All just a really strong utility card, definitely a 4 of, and I don't see going any less than 4 anytime soon. And one of the reasons why it's so good is because of the numbers it makes with our main girl from set 11 that we are still running at 4 of, mainly for this reason. So this was the generic from set 11 that we talked about last time, the really strong card that checks the top 5 cards of your deck and calls them to the board if you played in order, which is not hard in this deck because, as we said, we're running still 4 copies of this and a copy of the Grail. So you have 5 orders, so you're not hard to proc that skill, which is good to help fill up your board because card hand size can be a little tricky, especially in the early game. So being able to superior call is nice, but then also, more importantly now, is her second skill, which is if your opponent's at grade 3, she gets 10,000 power provided you have 3 units, other units on the board, which is not hard in this deck. Why that's important is because of the numbers that makes with the promo. So say your rear guard columns have both of these in it. You attack with this first. You give 5,000 power to your front row. Now, Tierfelt is in a column with a Grey One booster, almost certainly Din Drain, right? That number by itself, without a Persona Ride, is 33 now instead of 28. It used to be 28. It's now 33. On a Persona Ride turn, that's 43. Potentially while your opponent's a grade 2. That's a really good number to be hitting right now. Getting above front trigger, getting above 20k shields is huge. So we love that just for the number games of just being able to hit and get past shield value. 33, 43 is a really, really strong number to be hitting. So that's why these two work so well together and why ideally you have these as your front row circles. So let that, she's your main aggression card because of that free 10k power she just gains in combination with the new promo. So 4 copies of her for sure. And rounding out the grade 2s, we are still running Turnar, just down to 2 copies now. This was the card that if you have 3 face down cards at the end of the battle that she attacked, she can go to the soul and counter charge. Great utility card, down to 2 now because it's just in the early game and even a good chunk of the mid game, she's kind of a dead card. You might not have 3 face down damage depending on how the game is gone. It's not a super amount of counterblast in this deck. Ezel counterblasts and the card that we'll talk about in the grade 1 section that I've talked about before, counterblast, but that's really it. So you're not going through counterblast super fast, so she's not active. It's just that the game goes on, you get into the late game, then she definitely becomes relevant, both for the soul and the counterblast. So you do go through a good amount of soul. So I like having her just for a little bit of utility and making sure I can keep going if the game goes long. So 2 copies of her. Then for the grade 1s, no real change here. Still 4 copies of the best card in the deck, Din Drain. We've talked about her at length last time. It doesn't really need much going over. On play, Soul Blast 2 counter charge. It's an emergency counter charge. You're not normally going to do that. I don't think I've done that more than once or twice just because the Soul Blast 2 is a little heavy in this deck, but it's there if you need it. What she's really here for is at the end of the battle she boosts. Tuck the rear guard that she boosted to the bottom of the deck to open the spot up, for Ezel to call to it, and then she also restands, so she boosts again. So there's a really, really good card in this deck for turning Ezel's superior call during the battle phase on, and also still being able to boost twice. So like I said, mainly the thing that you want boosting with her to just hit the really good numbers. 4 copies, great card. Another thing that's not going down any less anytime soon. Still 4 copies of Silver Fring Witch. Similar, just a really strong utility card. She's your draw power in this deck when she's placed. If you have an Ezel Vanguard, you counterblast 1, draw a card, she gets 5k. So 13k booster, beater, and then also just draws you a card to fill your hand back up. So important, like I said, outside of her, there's really not a whole lot of plussing this deck does. So keep her at 4 copies, just for that plussing to try and keep cards in your hand, which is very needed. And yeah, still, this is, I don't think, ever going to change. You know it, I know it. We are just doing the Sanctitude, 3 Nation Perfect cards. Sanctitude stops triple drives that have the text triple drive, and Nation Perfect cards you don't have to discard if you have one of those card in hands. And Sanctitude also gets around guard restrict. You know, we talk about it every time. That's just the lineup you're always going to do, unless you're a Grade 4 deck. That's not Bastion. Now, the trigger lineup, this is where things have changed pretty significantly. I am actually doing 4 regular critical triggers alongside 4 draw triggers and 3 front triggers. We are doing the rainbow. I tried this deck without the draw triggers and just running crits and fronts, and it's just not quite work. This deck unfortunately just really needs that draw power. So there isn't a ton of it, and like I said, you're discarding a lot, especially in the early game, and you really just need a little bit more extra draw power to help you not die, to not having no cards in your hand. So I really feel like you need the 4 draws. Fronts are here. I've talked about this before in set 13. 20k shields are insanely important, especially where now I'm running 4 10k shields. I really, really want the fronts, so I run the fronts for the 20k shield, and more power to the front row is always great. Now you might be wondering, for the crits, why are we running 4 generic and not the 4 effect crits that go to soul? And you can make an argument for the go to soul crits in this deck because you do go through a good amount of soul. But the main thing to remember here in this deck is that you have the fun utility of Din Drain being able to put your rear guards on the bottom of the deck. So in certain situations, you can call triggers to the board, boost them with Din Drain, and put them back into your deck. And then you'll shuffle with Ezel immediately after. And so because of that, we want triggers that are 5k, not 4k. Because if they're 4k triggers, you're only hitting 22, which is a terrible number. If you have a 5k trigger like these, it's 23. The force to drop a 15k shield makes it harder to guard. So I like having the 4 crits that I can use as targets for Din Drain to put back into the deck. And because of that, we're doing a similar lineup that you've seen before with me, is 2 generic heals for that exact reason we just talked about, especially for putting heals back into the deck. With Din Drain, you want to have at least 2 generics. If you wanted to run 4 generic in this deck, I'd understand. But I am doing 1 each of the effect just because of the meta we're in right now, with your Youthbergs, your Jejeweleds, your Nirvanas, your Leonorans, all the restanding, all the crits. I like having 1 of each of these, but definitely at least 2 generics in this deck, especially because of Din Drain. And then we did do a OT swap. I am running the blue. I came around to the blue in this deck just for getting pieces back into your hand and having another crit, since we are only running 4. The crit pressure just feels a little lacking now, so I wanted another crit in the deck. Restanding with the red OT is nice, but Ezel doesn't really have a rear guard that really takes full utilization of that like some other decks do. So I wanted the 5th crit as well as the utility of putting a card back into my hand if I lost it. So blue OT it is for now. We might go back to the red in a different meta, but for right now, we're doing the blue. that's our 46 cards as of recording. We still don't have that update legal for 50 cards, but I know exactly what those 4 extra spots are going to be. So I'll just go ahead and tell you. Once we are legal to run 50 card main deck, we are doing 2 copies of Topaz and 2 copies of Pedala. So Topaz we talked about in the Bastion update. Just the great utility card, the generic from set 12. The put 2 cards from your ride line back face up in the G zone, or face up in the G zone, face up in the ride line. And you can either get 15k shield if you're guarding with it, or you can top 5 and call. Like I said, it's really important to build your board up as early as possible, so having another ability to check top 5 and superior call is great in this deck, and having extra 20k shields is very important, again, because we're running Jaws. So great card, definitely running 2. You go through Soul pretty fast in this deck, so having the ride line cards in your drop zone, not hard. So definitely 2 Topaz for sure. And then we're doing 2 Kedwalla as just another good utility card. He's a self-clearer. He removes himself from the rearguard circle, so you don't have to worry about not having a Din Drain to put him back. He will just clear the rearguard circle for himself. And he also has a little bit extra draw power, because he is top 3. Put a card into your hand if it's a grade 2 or greater. If not, shuffle draw. So either way, you're adding a card into your hand, potentially a Persona Rider or the Order, which can be nice for just setting up for next turn. So we just like him for that utility of the self-clear, and then also just getting cards into your hand. So these are definitely my 4 that I'm adding. Come the update in a week and a half, 2 weeks now, and then we get that update. But yeah, that is the deck as it currently stands. I still like this deck a lot. It's my fancy FFR while I'm wrapping up. It's, you know, he's my boy. He's got a really great skill. He's still really strong. 5 attacks is never nothing to sneeze at. You can get some pretty good numbers. Like I said, 43 on a Persona Ride turn is a strong column to be swinging with. It doesn't quite have the draw powers we're talking about. Is the issue here, to be able to really keep up with the big 3. So it definitely struggles there. I think it's a solid tier 2 deck. It's nothing crazy, but it's not bad. I wouldn't say this deck is bad, or I don't tell you this deck is bad. It can definitely surprise you, especially if it goes first and you get to just ride skip up on your opponent while you're at grade 1, and then while they're at grade 2, you Persona Ride and you're swinging with those 43k columns on them, and they're at grade 2, which is not easy to deal with. But I like this deck. I'm having a lot of fun with it. As we've talked about, I care more about decks that I have fun with than decks that are just the super meta picks, and I enjoy playing this deck. So I'm going to keep doing it, and we'll see if we get any more updates for these encounter cards, or if we just keep getting more promos that are incredibly difficult to get a hold of. We'll see. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk Ezel on what to do with this deck. If you have your own thoughts, let me know. And otherwise, you'll be seeing us soon. Thanks. Bye.